Paul Gauguin, 1848 to 1903, was a French post-impressionist painter whose life and career illustrate both the struggles of an artist searching for originality and the allure of distant lands as a source of inspiration. He was born in Paris to a French father and a Peruvian mother, and after political upheaval in France, his family traveled to Peru, where Gauguin spent part of his childhood surrounded by the exotic colors and cultures that would later resurface in his artistic imagination. Returning to France, he eventually joined the merchant navy and traveled widely, gaining early experiences of foreign places that deepened his restlessness. By the early 1870s, Gauguin had settled into a bourgeois life in Paris, working successfully as a stockbroker and living with his Danish wife, Mette Sophie Gade, with whom he had 5 children. During this time, he began painting as an amateur, collecting works by Impressionists and eventually taking up the brush himself under the guidance of Camille Pissarro. His early canvases reveal the influence of Impressionism, with an interest in light, atmosphere, and natural landscapes, but Gauguin soon found the style unsatisfying because it focused too heavily on visual sensation and not enough on inner meaning. By the mid-1880s, after a stock market crash and a personal crisis, Gauguin abandoned his financial career to dedicate himself entirely to painting, a decision that brought with it financial hardship and the eventual breakdown of his family life. His marriage ended in separation, and he began a life marked by instability, poverty, and artistic experimentation. Moving between France, Brittany, and overseas destinations, he cultivated a distinctive style characterized by bold colors, simplified forms, and heavy outlines, a technique that became associated with synthetism and cloisonnism. These innovations represented his belief that art should go beyond mere representation and should instead convey emotions, spirituality, and symbolic ideas. In Brittany, he became the central figure of the so-called Pont-Aven school, influencing younger artists and experimenting with flat surfaces and strong contrasts that would later shape modernist art. One of the most famous episodes of his life occurred in 1888, when he traveled to Arles to work alongside Vincent van Gogh. Their time together was intensely creative, but also fraught with tension, ending in bitter quarrels that contributed to Van Gogh's mental breakdown and the infamous incident of his self-mutilated ear. Gauguin's own art from this period shows his rejection of naturalism in favor of expressive color and simplified design, moving further away from Impressionism towards symbolism. He also began to develop his fascination with what he called primitive cultures, yearning for a simpler, purer existence that contrasted with the industrialized and materialistic society of Europe. This quest took him first to Panama and Martinique, and later, in 1891, to Tahiti, which became the defining chapter of his career. In Tahiti, Gauguin sought to immerse himself in Polynesian culture and to find inspiration for a new kind of art that was closer to myth, ritual, and nature. However, his vision was deeply idealized, shaped as much by his own fantasies as by reality. And his paintings from this period reflect both genuine admiration for the local people and the colonial stereotypes of his time. He produced a series of remarkable works depicting Tahitian women in everyday scenes, symbolic tableaux, and dreamlike landscapes. His use of color became more daring and symbolic, with wide, flat planes of vibrant tones that conveyed emotional and spiritual intensity. Some of his most celebrated paintings, such as Spirit of the Dead Watching, 1892, and The Day of the God, 1894, emerged from this period, combining Polynesian themes with European artistic innovation. Despite the beauty of his Tahitian works, Gauguin's life in the islands was marked by hardship, poverty, and illness, particularly syphilis, which caused him constant suffering. He clashed with colonial authorities and missionaries whose restrictions and moral codes he resented, and he often lived on the margins of society. In 1897-98, at a moment of despair, he created what he considered his masterpiece, Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? A vast allegorical painting that encapsulated his philosophical reflections on the human condition, life, and death. He later moved to the Marquesas Islands in search of greater isolation, but his final years were troubled by legal disputes, ill health, and growing bitterness. Still, he continued to paint, carve wooden sculptures, and write, leaving behind not only visual works, but also writings that reveal his complex thoughts about art, society, and his own life. Paul Gauguin died in 1903 at the age of 54, largely unrecognized and impoverished, but his radical approach to color, form, and symbolism had a profound influence on the development of modern art. His rejection of realism, his insistence on the expressive power of color, and his exploration of myth and spirituality paved the way for later movements such as Fauvism and Expressionism, inspiring artists like Henri Matisse and Pablo Picasso. Today he's remembered not only as a painter, but also as a figure who embodied the modern artist's struggle between civilization and the search for authenticity, between personal turmoil and the pursuit of beauty, leaving behind a legacy that remains both influential and controversial.